And thank you for joining this session. There's a lot of interesting activity happening at the same time. We're very grateful that you chose to join us here on the discussion around entrepreneurship on creating a vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem in OIC or Muslim majority countries. We have a very distinguished panel, and I look forward to participating in the discussion with our panelists. And we've also just decided as a panel that we want to make this very interactive and have as much discussion with you as possible. So before I share a few slides, I wanted to ask from the group we have here, how many of you are entrepreneurs? Still, okay. A few entrepreneurs in the room. And how many of you are involved in policy formation? Interesting, an entrepreneur and a policy person. That's very interesting. We'll come to you later to hear about that. And how many of you are in the financial sector? Okay, so a lot of financial folks here. Some entrepreneurs and some policy people. That's very interesting. So we'll pick up on all of these themes in our conversation. I'm going to start with a few slides to set the scene for you. And I'm sure that this will be very familiar to you. In terms of the need for entrepreneurship, it's understood very well. We have in Muslim majority countries and in developing countries as a whole, a huge demographic opportunity, but it's also a challenge. We have young populations, young people entering the workforce. If they have opportunities, if their economies are vibrant, it's a fantastic thing, and it's what you call a demographic dividend, and life is wonderful. If, however, young people enter the workforce or working age and there are not jobs, the private sector is not vibrant, there's no growth, then we have a lot of issues. Economic issues, of course, social issues, and a lot of instability in the region is clearly linked to a scarcity of economic opportunities. So this is not a luxury for us, but rather this is a necessity to develop the private sector, and entrepreneurship is a key element to that. There's also a shift, and at least many of the countries of the Islamic world, from industrial to knowledge-based economies, or even hydrocarbon-based economies to knowledge-based economies. And in that, it requires entrepreneurship and services sector, lots of businesses to be created, which are different from the classic 19th century model of large factories, 9-to-5 shift workers and assembly lines. That's different from the economic needs that we need now to be competitive. So that is another need for entrepreneurship. And the evolving role of government. And I can speak from a GCC perspective that, after the huge prosperity gains that occurred in this part of the world, expectations were that the government will take care of you. So if you're a young person and you're a national, the government will find you a job, it'll be a lifelong job, and you don't have to worry about that. Things have certainly changed, certainly in Saudi Arabia, for example. The attitudes or expectations from the government have changed as the government's capacity to absorb young people has also changed. So there's an evolving role of government. We'll be talking in this panel about a series of aspects that feed into the culture of entrepreneurship. And so my esteemed colleagues will be talking on each of these, but let me set the stage. In terms of aspiration, this is very critical. So do people aspire to be entrepreneurs? Do people find entrepreneurship to be something admirable? Is that even a vision that is held in the population? That's a first question. A second question is around skills. Let's say that there is a large segment of the population that wants to start businesses and be business leaders. Do they have the proper knowledge and background to do that? Another aspect that we'll talk about is the regulatory aspects of market enablement. How easy is it to start a business? Can you own a business? If you own that business, how easy is it for you to expand it? How much will you have to face in terms of supervision, regulation, etc., and will that help you or will that hinder you? These are the questions that we need to address. And of course, funding and capital markets. Now, many of you have mentioned being in the financial services sector, and clearly the question that is an important question is, will there be funding available for entrepreneurs, and will there be financial rewards if entrepreneurs are successful? I have laid out a very basic schematic here, which will hopefully illustrate the point that the challenges in fostering entrepreneurship vary significantly across what we call the OIC world or the Muslim majority world. So we're here, of course, at the World Islamic Economic Forum, and there's certainly many common themes across Islamic countries, but there are lots of differences too. And so especially when we talk about entrepreneurship, I think we'd be remiss to not highlight this. So what I've done here, this is a 3x3 matrix. If you play tic-tac-toe, then you've got a winning combination there. And it's simply to illustrate how you would cluster or categorize these markets. So here in the Gulf, we have a number of countries that are low population with high prosperity. I've also included Brunei, and we have the CEO of Brunei's largest bank here, who can attest to this as well, that it's a high income, low population country. Creating entrepreneurship or fostering entrepreneurship in these countries has its own set of challenges, one of which I'm sure we'll talk about in the panel has to do with incentives and people feeling that there's plenty of employment in the government is, working for the government is easy. I can start at 7, finish at 2 or 3, and go home, have a comfortable life. And so what's the need for doing something on my own or starting my own business? So the opportunity costs are actually quite high. That's one challenge. And other challenges also associated with these countries. But the good news, of course, is that they have the resources to fund programs to promote entrepreneurship. If you move to the next box that I've highlighted, which is the medium prosperity and medium population countries, and two examples, strikingly similar countries in some ways, are Saudi Arabia and Malaysia in terms of population and GDP per capita. Here, you see generally a lot clearer understanding of the need for entrepreneurship. It's more dire. Job creation is an imminent challenge. The need to catalyze the private sector is a more urgent and recognized issue. And the resources also have been increasingly allocated for this. So of course Malaysia has several initiatives. In fact, I was at an event where the discussion was how do we coordinate amongst the various entrepreneurship promoting agencies, be they, there's something called Magic, I think Malaysia now, there's an SME bank, there are lots of different things that have been put there. Saudi Arabia as well has launched a number of initiatives, some at the provincial level, some at the federal level, so they have resources and they also recognize the challenge. And then of course comes the large population and lower income countries. And I've cited two which are large population centers, Egypt and Indonesia, where again the needs are very similar. The resources are not as abundant, and therefore the strategies need to be cognizant of those market realities. I'll share a couple of slides before we turn it over to the panel, but especially as one of the themes that we're talking about will be policy. What are some of the common pitfalls, the mistakes that governments make? One that we see is what you might call a moral hazard issue. So are the governments financing businesses that are otherwise not worthy of finance? So are these people who've tried to get finance elsewhere and they end up as a last resort coming to the government, so you end up with a book, if you will, of poor assets? A second issue which we see a lot of in the Gulf is funding hobbies, not businesses. One of the issues, as I was speaking with a policymaker on this, that we faced again in this region, is that it's not mandatory for entrepreneurs to leave their day jobs, which probably makes sense. But one of the consequences of it is that the business that they're taking funding for may not get a lot of their time. They may be doing this more for fun than for actually starting a business, and they may not have the economic impact that was intended by the funder. Selection processes, how rigorous are they? How selective are they? An important question. And one theme which has already come up in our discussions amongst the panelists was the focus on quantity rather than quality. A push to deploy a certain budget rather than looking for high quality businesses. And I know that Dawood Vikri will want to touch on this in his comments. I will close actually with this slide here, and then open it up or invite the panelists one by one as we'll have our discussion. But really, what do we need to do for entrepreneurship? As I say here, it requires concerted effort. It's a key strategic need, there's no doubt in that. But it is a system not an initiative. It's not a one-time project. It's not a single step that you take, but rather it's a system you need to develop. We use the term ecosystem in our discussion. And in terms of who needs to be part of that, governments have a role, banks have a role, but again, typically banks are not the best place to fund entrepreneurial ventures, at least at the early stages. So what is the right role of a bank is an important question. Private investors have a role to play, and the education system has a very important role to play. And thankfully we have on our panel representation in all of these areas. So with that, let me start, and I'll introduce the panelists. To my left is Philip, and Philip is from the Dubai government, or works with the Dubai government in the Silicon Oasis initiative, which, as he was explaining to us, has to do with investment as well as building the ecosystem for entrepreneurship in the region, or in Dubai itself and in the UAE as a whole. So we're very honored to have him. To his left is Dawood Vikri, who is president and CEO of INCEIF, the Global University for Islamic Finance. And he'll be speaking from the perspective of an educator as well as a financier. And to his left is Tom Wolf, who himself is an entrepreneur, has started a very innovative platform for philanthropy, but is also an expert, a thought leader in reviving or encouraging entrepreneurship here in the UAE, and of course brings international perspective to that. So with that, I'd invite you to welcome the panelists, and then we'll start the discussion. Thank you so much. The question to the organizers, my iPad. Do you know who has it? Okay. So it's not that I'm trying to multitask, but we have a Twitter feed. So we have a feed here. So anyone who's using the hashtag or has questions can put those questions in. So I've got this here running, so I can be guided by you as we move forward. But of course, I'll start with some questions to our panelists, and then we'll take it from there. So if I can start with Philip. Now, Philip, you are in Dubai, of course, which has a thriving private sector. Can you tell us about your organization, its mandate, and why it was established, and what you're trying to achieve in your day-to-day work?
Okay, I'm representing Dubai Silicon Oasis. It's a government entity with a mandate to further technology innovation, technology development, and entrepreneurship in the Emirate of Dubai and the wider region. As such, we do anything from infrastructure development. We have a technology-free zone, a technology park with about 1,000 technology companies in there. We run an incubation program for young entrepreneurs. We have a co-working space with a very competitive, setup financially as well as value add. We do equity investments. We strongly support the development of Islamic economy within the Emirate of Dubai by supporting the creation of Arabic digital content and Arabic digital media, as well as related technologies and entrepreneurs. As such, we see our mission in creating a technology cluster within Dubai and supporting, therefore, the transition into a knowledge-based economy in the Emirate of Dubai, as well as in the Arab world. So we look at, from the investment point of view, we look at the mandate, everything in MENA, North Africa, Levant, GCC.
And can you, Philip, tell us about the origin? So what was the need? Why did Dubai feel the need to create this?
Well, there's a political notion to create a knowledge-based economy. As some of us know, Dubai doesn't have any oil. Dubai is a trading powerhouse. We are the innovation hub in the Middle East, and it is our mandate to support that and help thinking about what are the needs of Dubai to support, to excel in innovation and entrepreneurship, and to create technology and technology companies that actually innovate, create, and research, engage in research and development in Dubai.
Very good, thank you. Now, David, if I can turn to you, INCEIF, why is entrepreneurship important to you from where you sit at INCEIF?
Thanks for that question, and good afternoon, everybody. We're a postgraduate university, but the answer to the question is twofold. In part, we've certainly seen a growing need as a university which teaches at postgraduate level in Islamic finance for our students to learn some of the softer skills. So if we unleashed the power of our students, they decided they wanted to set up an entrepreneurial club, and we said yes, and we've tried to facilitate that. So there's a recognition that building some of the softer skills around entrepreneurship, engagement with people who are, are entrepreneurs, and encouraging them to go out and be entrepreneurial is part of the well-rounded education that we need to provide. The second aspect is one which really relates to financial literacy, and even though we're a postgraduate university, we are engaged and will continue to be engaged in two programs, which is supported not only by our research students but also by faculty and myself. One is financial literacy programs where, building skills and competency from primary school level upwards. We've been involved in a particular organisation which is now sponsored by a major Islamic bank in Malaysia, in educating primary school children in basic financial skills, in terms of the benefits of borrowing at a lower rate as opposed to borrowing on a credit card, the idea of budgeting and so on and so forth. And we've been engaged in developing that. The second area of engagement, which is relatively new and something that we're still building or working on the very initial stages of a prototype, is virtual gaming. And we're engaged in developing a virtual banking game which focuses on Islamic finance as a way of getting across to, I hesitate to use this Gen Y, I'm not sure there's Gen X, and maybe we get to Gen Z later, but I come from Gen D, which is called dinosaur generation, according to my children. But it's a way of actually getting skills across through play. And so we're engaged in the early stages of developing a virtual banking game which will be global and competitive, which embellishes all the skills required to be not only entrepreneurial, but also to learn the basis of Islamic finance. So perhaps I'll rest at that stage, but as a former banker, both conventional and Islamic banker, I can see certainly a very clear need to build skills and competency at a very early age. I started my career in a British bank, Lloyds Bank, officially after I graduated in 1973. In 1975, I was put onto a team which was trying to encourage SME business. We didn't call it that then because nobody knew what an SME was, but it was small entrepreneurial companies. And what we found was that none of them knew what a cash flow statement was, none of them knew what a balance sheet looked like, none of them had any basic accounting skills, but they had some good business ideas. And at that time, Lloyds Bank invested quite a bit of money in building a team that went out and taught these people those skills. And as a result, they built a customer base and some loyalty. And I'm going back now, it's pretty much 40 years. I'm not sure banks do that anymore. I'm delighted I'm here today as a former banker, but certainly some of my predecessors and some of my former mentors must be rolling in their respective graves that I actually dare to talk about entrepreneurship, because certainly as a conventional banker in my day in the UK, you didn't look at entrepreneurs until they were millionaires.
Very good. Well, until they were ready for private banking services. Very good. Well, Tom, your perspective in terms of being an entrepreneur here in the region, and if you could share with us, first of all, how entrepreneurship fits into your career and your life trajectory overall, and also why you chose to be an entrepreneur here of all places.
I guess I've had the privilege of being involved in kind of the financial service sector as an employee. So my kind of formative years post-graduation were with Accenture, and perhaps for me the finest grounding in modern day business, because it gives you that side. I was lucky to do the kind of sexy strategy side, but I also got taught to code. I got taught the basic fundamentals of business, and so much more than I learned in probably my first 15 hours at a 15-hour working day, that is, at Accenture, that I had done in a 3-year studying economics at university. And I did 5 years with those guys, but I think life circumstances for me, at age 26, I became financially responsible for my mother and my younger brother, and I had to turn kind of $1 each day that I was earning into $3 each day I was earning. And so for me, I've worked in the Middle East. I saw opportunities here to build a business. And I've been out here with Accenture, and I kind of rolled my sleeves up and got stuck in. I've kind of done my own thing all my life, and I think for me it was particularly what attracted me about the Middle East and Dubai, especially although I've had other businesses around the region. So my big failure, it's always good to talk about the things you haven't done so well, is I built a helicopter logistics company in Iraq in 2008. And we had a couple of very successful years, and then some not so successful years when we had a helicopter stolen and one driven into by the US Special Forces. So it's always a good way to lose all your money and have to start again. So I think I've seen a bit of everything here in terms of the region. Some things that have gone really well, and some things that have gone less well. I still have my Accenture shares. I still love my colleagues. I miss the intellectual rigour of a formal business life, but I've been, I suppose, personally been emancipated by not having that structure, being able to dictate my own life, live and die by my own sword. And I think that talking about entrepreneurship in the region just as an overall thing is that there is enormous culture of entrepreneurship here. There is across the whole region. If we take perhaps some of the GCC countries out of the mix, I'm always impressed because there's a concept that you get up each day and you make bread, or you build your own legacy, and that there isn't a handout, and there isn't something that's given to you. And I think that spirit of entrepreneurship now needs to be taken to the next level. What we have a difficulty with is enabling small, call the idea market trader type businessmen, and enabling them with the ecosystem to scale those businesses. It's a huge challenge for a lot of the developing world. Is our financial systems aren't in place, our structural systems aren't there to enable small SMEs to scale.
Thank you, Tom. Let me stay with you for a minute on that. You mentioned the word culture. Do you see a culture of entrepreneurship, particularly vis-a-vis failure? Do you see the cultural views on failure to be a barrier, an enabler, neutral, when you look at it across the Muslim majority markets?
I think that there is I have many friends and peers across all levels of society in the Middle East, and I speak to parents, friends who have businesses. I speak to parents, and you ask them what they want their children to be. And the term doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer are the coat hooks upon which they hold their head high. And if they have a child that might have started a business, they're almost as if they're a forgotten child. And you know, God forbid, if that child has failed at a business, then they've been written out of the family tree already. And so I think that failure is something that we don't acknowledge here. We don't celebrate it. We don't see it as a vital path to success. And you can go through name after name after name of our world's greatest entrepreneurs, leaders, and they've all failed. They've all learned from that failure, and failure is far more important than success. I've learned a great deal more from all the things I've done wrong than all the things I've done right. In fact, when I've done things right, it's made me lazy, I've been complacent, and perhaps I haven't sharpened my sword every day. Whereas when I've failed and when I haven't done things right, it's when I've got up every morning, sharpened my sword, and got on with it.
Okay, well, David is excited by this, so I'm going to let him into the discussion. But David, I also would like you to do in your response.
Okay, I mean, I wanted to jump in, and thanks on that, because the reason I was excited is I celebrate a birthday at the end of this week, and I'm well over 60, so I'm not going to tell you which one it is, but you can guess. But I was reminded when you said this fear of failure, and what parents expected for it. And I remember when I was in my final year as an undergraduate at a university in the UK, and I was having a discussion with both my parents about my career, and I was certainly thinking about banking, but I dropped in the idea that I might want to go on and do a master's and perhaps go and teach. And I was very roundly reminded by both my mother and father, almost in unison, those who can do and those who can't teach. And here I am running a university today, which is kind of interesting, and they've forgiven me for doing that, and I did have a career in banking. But I think this fear of failure thing, in terms culturally, it does vary from country to country. It varies within the Middle East. It varies within different regions. And I think unless you create an environment where you do allow people to fail, but you may have some form of safety net, or you may have some means of actually encouraging people to to go on and try. I think the life lessons you learn, and your helicopter instance, I've set up 2 companies. I've invested and got very close to a couple more companies. The 2 companies I set up worked all right, but one company, I lost a lot of money on because, I chose the wrong partners and it was the wrong business model, and you learn lessons about that. So I think failure is very, very important, and we shouldn't be afraid of it culturally. You've got to try, and you learn huge lessons from it. I accepted this job. I'm Vice Chancellor of a university. 3 years ago I was appointed. I've never run a university, and I've never taught a class in my life. And I'm looking at Mushtaq Parker now, and he knows that very, very well. But in actual fact, you've got enough life experience to go on there and try, and you use the skills you have, and you grow and develop it. And a lot depends on the culture and environment around you. It's not just the culture of the country, it's the support network you have. And I've got one other comment I can make on this. I met a wonderful group of people this morning from Scotland called the Marifa Leadership, and some of them are sat in front of me right here, and I'm delighted you're here. These are young people, young professionals, young budding entrepreneurs, and their whole mission is about unleashing their potential. And they thought they were learning from me by spending 10 minutes with them, but I was actually learning from them much more than they can imagine, because of their enthusiasm, because of their passion, and because they want to share, and I want to share experiences with them. It's about having those support networks in your ecosystems, and each of us on this stage will know who those people are who've helped and shape and develop our careers, and the difference is people who spend time with you.
Thank you so much, David. Let me turn to Philip. Philip, one question which is often addressed in this issue of entrepreneurship is, what's the appropriate role of government? And from your perspective, both, and Philip has had a long career at IBM, he's been in banking, so he's certainly been in the private sector enough to understand that point of view. So Philip, what do you think is the appropriate role of government in supporting entrepreneurship?
Well, in an ideal world, the government should not be involved at all in the entrepreneurship space. However, especially in the region, the innovation, entrepreneurship, SME space is quite nascent, so government would like to support and supercharge the development. That's what we're trying to do by lobbying within government to make it easier to set up businesses, to make it cheaper to set up businesses, to have, when we're talking about failure, to have a more clear indication on bankruptcy law, what happens if companies dissolve, are insolvent within a Sharia-compliant legal framework. Theoretically, in the UAE, if you bounce a check, you go to jail. We need to take away that fear of failure, also from a legal perspective, as well as from a cultural perspective, to enable people to try it out. And if you fail after 2 years, you learned a lot, you go back into banking, you become a professor or some other career. So that's one aspect. So how much should a government be engaged? That's a tricky question. In the GCC, government is very engaged in the entrepreneurship space. So we have INCEIF in Internet City, which is an incubator. We have Silicon Oasis Founders, which is an incubator. We have the Qatar Business Incubation Center in Qatar. Kuwait does stuff in KSA of a number, including Modan, who support entrepreneurship and have programs to support that. In the countries that, in the Middle Eastern countries that have a low population and a high value of GDP, most of the money and support programs are geared to the nationals of such countries. However, we see that most of the talent, most of the entrepreneurs, of the hungry young minds are not nationals of that country, while in very populated, poorer countries, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, these initiatives are well pronounced, not as well pronounced, even though Lebanon does a great job, Jordan does a great job in these things. So, from our perspective, what we're trying to do, we're trying to supercharge the ecosystem from a government level. Show investors, show angels, show entrepreneurs that you can be very successful within the UAE, within Dubai, within the GCC to start your business. Once it is globally recognize that you can make money as an angel investor, that you can make money as a VC investor, you can make money as a private equity investor, and you can be very successful with at least a decent amount of risk as an entrepreneur. People will come and start their businesses in the UAE, in Qatar, in Kuwait, in the GCC. Once investors see it's a rule of law, if investors see there's big exits, they will come, they will fund the ecosystem, and by that time government can take a step back and let the free market theory work and have private investors, private individuals start off and do stuff. Until then, we will try to support, seed, lobby, and create an ecosystem that makes it as easy, as simple, as risk minimizing as possible for international investors to find young talent to invest in and prosper.
It's fascinating. So do you feel that, inshallah, when you're successful in your role, the mandate will shrink over time?
I certainly hope so.
Fascinating. All right, interesting. Well, we'd asked about the role of government. I'm following the Twitter feed, and I see questions pertaining to banks, the role of banks in supporting entrepreneurship. So, David, let's start with you on this question, having confessed to have been a banker. So, David, if you could give us your point of view on what is the appropriate role for banks to play in entrepreneurial finance?
Well, I mean, you've already heard my point of view as an ex-banker, and my apologies to any current banking colleagues on this, but the banks aren't particularly well geared up to support this area. This area. I did notice a difference 20 years ago when I started moving to Islamic finance. There was certainly more interest amongst Islamic banks to understand the business and to get out there and to understand the risks and grow and support. But at the end of the day, banks have a fiscal responsibility, in theory, to make money for their shareholders, but also be secure for their depositors and provide a reasonable return to their depositors, so that the risk profile of entrepreneurs is probably outside of their bandwidth. But if you're looking at it from a point of view of Islamic finance and Islamic banks, and looking at aspects of risk sharing and asset management, then there certainly is an asset class where banks or asset management companies under Islamic finance can provide seed funds. And therefore it's taken out of the government, but investors who would want to, from a crowdfunding standpoint, I don't know your financing model, but there certainly is an appetite out there for banks to facilitate this, but to create the funds which are then directed towards entrepreneurs under certain criteria. Those criteria, I think, have to be fairly clearly defined, because I like your comment about hobbies and so on, and if I can use anecdotal evidence which actually pertains to me, and in the late 80s I was made redundant in the City of London, and I was pushing close to 40 at that stage, and finding a job was very, very difficult in the city. And I decided that I wanted to set up a consultancy business to actually sell what I knew, which was process re-engineering, as effectively as possible. And Her Majesty's government at that time not only provided an unemployment benefit, which was £22 a week, but if you were prepared to go to a school or college and learn how to set up your own business, they would continue to provide an additional £22 a week. So that was, I don't want to say a huge sum of money, but it kept the wolf from the door. What was interesting about that was it was a great initiative, but there was no follow-through to see what actually happened. We'll give you £22 a week, but we're not actually going to measure what you did or whether you did anything. I actually set up a business, and cut a very long story short here. The second assignment I got was in Malaysia. I discovered, my wife, I converted to Islam, and I also discovered Islamic finance. So I'm very, very glad I took the £22 a week. But I actually turned it into a business and did something with it. But there was no metric that checked the other people who were in the night school class to find out whether they actually did anything with it.
Fantastic question. And then it leads Philip back to you then. In terms of the initiative that you're involved in now, how will you measure success?
Well, there's different levels of measuring success. There's short-term success. One metric I think we use is the companies that qualify for investment and that we actually invest in. I think so for our purpose, we're trying to engage UN nationals in entrepreneurship. We do a lot of initiatives with non-UN nationals because these are the guys that are on radar screen and they're very active, very hungry. For us, one measure is every UN national that we engage into entrepreneurship, that we can help, that we can support, that we can show the other side of what you can do, not going into government, not going into family business, but creating something on themselves is a success for us. And then, quite frankly, bluntly, financial return is one of the metrics we use. For the one reason that if we make a lot of money with investments in startups, a lot of people will notice, and a lot of people want to also make a lot of money, which means they have to get involved, they have to look at entrepreneurs, they have to invest in companies. There's other metrics in between, but overall there's a society benefit, and partly of that, what we're doing is the educating, helping, guiding UN nationals to become entrepreneurial, think about opening an office somewhere, or thinking about opening a company somewhere, maybe partnering with somebody else to create something together. And the other metric is, for every startup that succeeds in Dubai, we're proud of. It's a new innovation, it's a new product, a new service, it's a couple new jobs that people create. Out of that, even if the company fails, somebody moves out of that company and says, I've seen the entrepreneurship process, I wasn't the entrepreneur, but I was involved, let's start my own thing. We're moving into more of this sort of economic development versus you get a job for your lifetime. Create something, and the more creators we create, the better for all.
Very good. Well, speaking then on this theme of success, how we measure success and what have you, Tom, if I could turn to you and ask for examples. If you had to cite an example that you would say is a best practice for supporting entrepreneurship or for encouraging people to start businesses, what example would you cite?
Gosh, I think like all things, motivation is all things to all people, but what motivates each of us is very different. So I have a business which I own, which is in the fitness space. It's been luckily incredibly successful, and it's enabled me to then go on and develop other businesses. I have a fundraising platform for charities that was started in the UK in 2002 called Just Giving. It's raised more than $3 billion for charities, and 100% of all the profit of that business goes back into the business to scale and grow the world of giving.
That was a billion with a B.
B, 3 billion US, and we'll do $900 million this year in donations to charities. So there are different things that motivate people for different reasons, and there has been nothing structural that has helped influence me to set those businesses up, other than my own ambition and my desire to pay my bills each day. So I have a business on this side that pays my bills, and another one that fuels my ambition to create something of a legacy. So what can we do to harness entrepreneurship? Is there a secret sauce? Is there a framework that we can do? I would say no. All I say we do is that we champion both success and failure, that we talk about it openly, that we share stories and we share insights. I mean, how many of us share a really bad picture of ourselves on Instagram or Facebook? I don't think anybody does. No one ever shares the bad and the ugly. We just share the good. And I think the more that we share the bad and the ugly, as well as the good, and that we share those pictures, and we champion those people that have been out there, tried, but they didn't succeed, I think that's the best example, so we can actually develop this framework.
Well, David, in your role, you have the opportunity to meet with many governments that are interested in private sector catalyzation. What would be your view in terms of the best practice, an example, a role model?
I'm very much inclined to agree with Tom, but I'm not going to get away with it, so simply. I think it depends, which is a classic consultant's answer to that. I think a lot depends on the individual, but one thing I think which is remarkably consistent from my experience is this attitude. I think it is an attitude of transparency, and I like your analogy with the social media, that people very rarely are negative about themselves on there. But we actually have to give honest feedback. I mean, it starts in the place of work, or it starts with your family. If somebody's doing something wrong, you should correct them. that's actually a very good Muslim practice. If people aren't doing the right thing, you should steer them on the right path. I see from my own experience, both in terms of running businesses and running the university, that part of it is the evaluation process, and it's giving honest feedback to people for how they're actually performing, and doing that in a constructive environment. But I think dealing with the countries that I'm dealing with, there is, in terms of implementing Islamic finance, I do get various questions from country leaders or from groups which are thinking about how do we do Islamic finance in our country. There's an element of naivety, because they kind of think that you need to wave a magic wand and make it happen. In the world of Islamic finance, Malaysia's achieved great things, but it didn't do it by waving a magic wand. It did it through the hard work. And I think that it behoves us to actually give honest feedback and say, it is tough and you have got to do this, but the driving force is different from individuals. I was out of work and I set up my own business. Why? Because I had a mortgage and I had family and I had, as I now say, because I've been in Asia for a long time, put rice on the table. And that is an amazing driving force. Now I'm comfortable, but I'm much more inclined in terms of my ambition to actually share back through being the principal and president of the university. So I think it's different for different people, and there is no magic touchstone formula here. But I do think you have to be aware of different environments, different people's motivations, and why they want to do things, and be honest in your feedback to say, that isn't going to fly because my experience tells me that didn't work under those circumstances.
Sure, and Philip, when your institution was being set up, was there a model, a case study, an example to which you were trying to emulate?
Well, when you talk about an ecosystem of entrepreneurship, I think everybody knows Silicon Valley. Malaysia has done a great job. London Tech City, Startup Chile. There is plenty of ecosystems where you can say, we want to do something similar with a similar outcome as these. So there's a model after that. We obviously do it the Dubai way, which is a little different, a little more shiny, and very, very efficient, hopefully. I think what also is very important are role models, people you can look up to, being in an Arab family, you can say, I want to be like Fadi Gandour, who started Arabics. I want to be like Ronnie, who started Souk.com. The more role model we have in this market here, in this region, the more the ambition of becoming one of the entrepreneurs, one of them who created 1,000 jobs and is famous now and cool and can walk around in a t-shirt and jeans. The more role models we have like this, the more the option of becoming an entrepreneur and setting something up will be appealing to young people and acceptable also to parents and family. So that's one thing we really support, is the storytelling of the successes we've had, not hiding the ones. And also at one point in the future, maybe all of the storytelling of the failures of people who have failed come up and say, I failed because of this and then I got up and I did it again, etc. I think it's an integral part to creating the ecosystem, to have these stories, leaders, and people you can look up to. And then, create the next Silicon Valley, for the lack of a better name, and an integrated ecosystem that is self-propelling.
Sure. Well, thanks, Philip. I'm struck as I observe here the panelists, that what we're hearing consistently are themes around culture, failure, role models, mentorship. So what might be referred to as quote-unquote softer aspects. I haven't heard anyone say tax law, ownership requirements, or some of those more structural issues. Is that because, why have those not been mentioned? Are those because those impediments don't exist, or because you feel they're straightforward?
Well, if you ask me, they're not straightforward, but they're like easily circumvented. So we're in a tax-free environment here, so tax doesn't really matter. There's an ownership restriction on company creation onshore, but there's 22 free zones, I believe, in Dubai, which give you 100% ownership of your own company. There is restrictions on investment. There's no preferred shares onshore, hence you do an offshore vehicle to invest. So there's many of these structural cumbersome,
obstacles. However, in the last decade, we've learned to circumvent them or to deal with them, versus cultural and more profound problems which are not as easily circumvented or solved.
Okay. And Tom, let me ask you about technology. How does technology play a role in either fostering entrepreneurship or affect the entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Well, I would say firstly that we've seen over the last 20 years that the explosion in the STEM industries, and so we've moved from a product-based kind of global society towards a STEM one. I think that we've been all very excited about business-to-consumer products through technology. So we all get very excited about how many billions people make out of Facebook or the other kind of things. But I would say that technology is providing structural change. I think probably what's most relevant to this audience is around the banking sector. So if we look at the banking sector, what technologies allow people to do is to disintermediate. So we're able to say a big structural bank with, take something like Lloyd's, who's about to fire another 9,000 employees, and they've laid off 100,000 employees in the last 7 years. And because the world of banking has changed and technology has enabled that now, we don't need to have a bank branch on every corner. In fact, if choosing my bank, I think if they've got a bank branch on any corner, why are they wasting so much of my money and all of our money collectively? Because there isn't a need for that. And I would say that we're probably still slightly behind the curve in the Middle East in terms of how our product innovation, but technology has enabled someone like, you guys may or may not be aware of a payment processing company called Stripe, okay, set up by a chap called Patrick Collinson, who left the shores of Ireland and went over to the States to study his undergraduate degree. Correct me if I'm wrong, he was either at Stanford or Harvard. The two just kind of blended into one for me, really, but in terms of as great education institutions. But he quit his degree. He set up with his brother a company called Stripe. I think they've now done in the last 18 months over $5 billion worth of payment processing. Okay, and what they do is they enable the digital economy to advance. They reduce the amount of overhead they carry as a business, and they're able to pass that reduction in overhead onto their merchants and then obviously the consumer. So credit card fees for someone like Stripe come down to as low as 1.4%. I think for most of us involved in e-commerce in this region, anything below 3 is a miracle. And they've enabled what they've done is now then allow thousands and thousands and thousands of other small businesses, SMEs, to bolt onto their payment gateway and sell products from their bedroom window or whatever else it might be. So one change in structure in the banking industry has enabled an enormous pyramid of businesses to start up underneath them, and rather than focusing on a big branch network and educating via going out to people, they have online workshops, they have roadshows whereby they enable businesses to set up quickly and cheaply. There is no cost to set up, there's no minimum order quantity, and so they really foster that innovation and entrepreneurship from the bottom up.
Excellent. Well, this is the last question from me before we open up and then also look at the Twitter feed. So David, should we, broadly speaking, stakeholders, the general public, should we expect Islamic financial institutions to be more active in entrepreneurial finance than A, they are today, and B, their conventional counterparts? Or is that not realistic?
The answer to the question is a resounding yes. I think the expectation of Islamic finance, and in terms of my understanding of it and my experience of it for more than 20 years, is Islamic finance is about the efficient and effective mobilization of capital for the benefit of the real economy. And if that means being disruptive and changing the model, then Islamic finance has to do it. I can cite one example. When I was CEO of an Islamic bank a decade ago, I went to see a reasonable sized SME business in another part of Malaysia. He was quite successful. He was turning over a good amount. He had 200 employees and he had a plant. And he'd been in business for 20 years. And I went to see him in 2005, and he said I was the first senior banker ever to go and visit him and take a look at his plant and try to understand his business. And we built a very good relationship on that. And I think the difference with Islamic finance is that you're engaged in a risk-sharing process, so you better understand the business. And you're also engaged in delivering results to the real economy, So if any aspect of banking is going to innovate and change in order to facilitate this, then Islamic finance is undoubtedly placed for it, and the expectation is that they should be doing more in order to develop that.
Excellent. Well, very good. What I'd like to do now is open it up and if we can take some questions. And I'd like to batch the questions, so if we can take 3 questions and then hear from the panelists their responses. First, let's see if there's anyone in the room. So the gentleman here in the front table. So the one first here, and then second, the man in the blue shirt.
Thank you for the splendid and very well-rounded presentation from all the panelists. You know, what I want to talk is mainly a comment and to find feedback. I look at entrepreneurship in Islamic banking to be, maybe to start with, you know, the problem of most of the Islamic banks, when Islamic banking started 40 years or so back, was that the cornerstone of it was an attempt to replicate or copy conventional banks. I look at entrepreneurship from this perspective to do it from the outset without having in mind the earlier practices of conventional banks, to make it original, to make it genuine, rather than ways and means to do it do it in the same way or manner that conventional banks are doing it. If this takes place, first of all, any ambiguity about Islamic banking being rightfully, you know, an inherent and original will phase away. And at the same time, the people who have any ambiguity or in their mind that maybe it's another way of doing it, like you know, just circle around and doing the same thing, will not have this, I mean, as an explanation or to fight, basically, or to criticize Islamic banks. I just want to see your views on this.
Sure, and sir, since we had a brief conversation before, I'm going to reverse with a question to you, if I may, which is your experience in Jordan. Jordan is often cited as an example of success in the Arab world for entrepreneurship. Do you agree with that assessment? And if so, what do you think caused it?
I really do. I think I'm very happy to hear Mr. Philip pointing out one example of Fadi Ghandour being a Jordanian who set up one of the biggest courier services in the world, is Aramex. And you have other names like Fine, or Arab Bank, whatever, which became beyond Jordan, and they give you the right example of how a small country like Jordan, with, again, going back to your comment about taxation, no taxation exemptions, nothing, yet success and the ability to go beyond. So entrepreneurship is there. Maybe the environment also has been throughout conducive to such a thing, especially that Jordan has throughout been a free economy. Very limited, limitations or restriction, free funds, fixed parity with the foreign currency available. This has made it happen. Of course, you have, you know, the challenges where Jordan is situated in an area turmoil. Your neighboring countries in totality have issues. It made it even more challenging.
Thank you so much. And sir, in the front row here in the blue shirt, thank you.
Hi, my name's Ken Emery, and I represent the Prince's Trust, which is the largest youth NGO in the UK, and an exciting new project called Funding Lab, where we're trying to embed youth entrepreneurship in university campus environments.
Could you repeat the name, sir? Funding Lab.
It's Funding a new project venture that I'm leading on. My question really is around both the role of the government and the banks in terms of entrepreneurship. From my experience, it's not so much a question of can the government and the banks provide funding for entrepreneurship. It's more a case of the actual regulatory environment and obstacles that many entrepreneurs face in setting up. For example, in many countries, just registering as a company can be extremely difficult. Being able to open a bank account, especially when you've got no previous credit history. This whole process and environment of encouraging entrepreneurship needs a lot of reform and simplification. The tax system for startup companies should be simplified. The challenges of employing people, and even things like employee incentive schemes, subsidising wages if you take somebody on for the first 6 months. I think that there's a very big role that both the government sector and the banking sector could play in terms of encouraging a really rich entrepreneurial startup environment. And I think that would do more than perhaps the funding. I think the funding is available from the private sector and other sources. It's really helping the businesses to get started and focus on their business idea rather than all the bureaucracy and stuff that can get in the road.
Thank you, sir. Is there a gentleman in the Jeep Chaudhry here? No, I don't see Najib Chaudhry. Okay, there was a tweet. I just want to read out a tweet that was sent by Najib Chaudhry, which says government intervention to create the vibrant ecosystem is very important for entrepreneurship to grow. Example USA, which is an interesting one. But sir, I think you had a comment as well. Yes. We'll take this question and then I'll let the panelists respond. But a question from the gentleman here.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. My name is Zakir Hussain. I'm from Bangladesh. Actually, frankly speaking, I have been attending the WIEF conference for the last couple of rounds, I think. And in the previous conference, we had this kind of discussion, bringing CEOs and very successful entrepreneurs from different parts of the world. And it's very good, and we are learning a lot. But my comment is, sort of a submission is like, while you are facilitating this kind of discussion and also bringing international best practices, and why not WIEF launch an initiative to create sort of a mandatory requirement or sort of a request to the respective governments to support the young entrepreneurs. For example, in Bangladesh, we have got huge liquidity at this moment in Bangladesh with the banking sector. I think some of my Bangladeshi delegates may be here. And our financial market for the moment, I think, I would say very weak in the sense of utilizing the depositors' money, because bank gives deposits and through on lending activities. But because of lack of new entrepreneurs, especially young entrepreneurs, that create employment for himself and also for another dozens of people. I'm talking about the new entrepreneurs. Sure. So I think this forum should initiate some program immediately to countries like Bangladesh and Palestine and also like Indonesia and some other countries. Then I think the outcome of this kind of discussion would take a really good shape.
Sure.
And I'd like to request the panelists and also the organizer to look into that matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And while you have the microphone, if I may ask, you said you're from Bangladesh.
Yes, yes.
Now, do you feel that microfinance is helpful in the context of entrepreneurship?
Well, microfinance basically in Bangladesh, that it was started 1976 by Dr. Professor Muhammadinus, and it was basically for the very, very grassroots people, and then they were using most of the money for, in many cases, for the agricultural activities, some very, very tiny economic activities, like buying a rickshaw. Rickshaw is a three-wheelers in Bangladesh, and you give this money to someone who has no job, so he takes the rickshaw and he rent the rickshaw and earn money every day, which is not an enterprise. Because by the way, I'm an expert in the entrepreneurship development. So I think enterprise would be like, for example, small enterprise, the owner himself, who is the innovator, who is the leader of the whole venture, and manager, and also, marketer. So, enterprise, entrepreneurship must create value in terms of, products, services, and then also number of employment.
Right.
Because, yeah.
No, well, thank you very much. So what I hear you saying is that the microfinance can help for self-employment and poverty alleviation, but not so much for enterprise creation.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's start then, Tom, with you and work our way backwards, responding to any or all of the questions that you heard from the group.
I have to say that I think, coming back to your point about Islamic banking not mirroring or picking up the bad habits of conventional banking, and actually being, because it's a more recent industry niche and cluster, is actually taking it forward to the next level and using more innovative practices. I think that we're starting to see more, I think if you take it Sharia financing and the idea of profit sharing rather than riba-based financing, then we look at crowdfunding now and something like a platform like Funding Circle in the UK, which is a Sharia compliant model of funding whereby businesses are able to equity crowdfund their startups or established businesses, and unlike something like Kickstarter, which is just a donation-based system, the Funding Circle, that they gain equity in that business, they share the profit of that business, and that they obviously bear some of that risk, but they also bear an enormous amount of the upside. So I think Funding Circle is an excellent example of where someone's taken a Sharia by default solution and taken that out to the rest of the world. And on a personal level, we engage with a vast number of the Islamic community through giving. And so what we did, and we started to get Muslim students come to us saying that they wanted to, in the UK specifically, crowdfund their education fees, because the British government brought in riba-based system for funding education. So current interest rates in the UK are 5.5% for students, which for the average student means they'll pay back £60,000 on a £27,000 student loan. So what we did is we looked at the Islamic principle of Card Hassan, and we built out now an interest-free system whereby students can crowdfund their student education, crowdfund the cost of university, and pay the community back over time, riba-free. So it's taken an Islamic principle, and then we put that at scale for students of all faiths.
And Tom, I think you've been very modest also not to mention Zakat. Could you share with us Zakat, which I really see as being at the intersection of entrepreneurship and Islamic social finance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a project that I've built and know intimately because we took Just Giving as I've touched upon before is a way to connect people with charities and disintermediate that and allow them to be able to support a charity and engage with that community. And often it's based on the perhaps rather Anglo-Saxon model of I'm going to go and do something and you can all get behind me doing it. So it started out with the London Marathon, and so I used to run the London Marathon because I was out of shape and overweight and wanted to go and do something, and people got behind me to do that, and I was going to do it for a cause. And so that's where our business started back in 2002, is funding people to take part in other sporting events. Some of you may have seen things like the No Makeup Selfie or the Ice Bucket Challenge, and all of that giving was enabled by Just Giving as a platform for doing the payment processing for the charities. What we realised is that as we expanded out to the Middle East and Africa, which is where I lead the business, is that we weren't serving the needs of our audience. So traditionally parts of the Middle East and Africa, we're amongst the world's highest givers, but we're the lowest doers. So we're very happy to give to charity, but we're not so keen on running around in an elephant costume doing the London Marathon, or Dubai Marathon, or the whatever marathon it might be, Standard Chartered over in Singapore. And so we wanted to really connect them. So we looked at the kind of core essence and the pillars of Islamic life, and that obviously Islamic giving and alms is so central to that. And we wanted to make sure that Muslims were able to give to charities that were safely and securely as well. So that we audit every charity on our platform. And so we've built out a product which enables someone to donate their zakat, to be able to calculate zakat in a very personal and private way, but make that process a digital one. The other way that we're able to scale that is that you're able to be able to track where your zakat funds have gone, or your sadaqah, and be able to have a conversation with the person or the charity that you're supporting, and enable that to be done at scale, but very privately, with that safety, that trust, and that transparency in the palm of your hand.
Very good. Well, David, we'll turn to you now, but let me just warn Philip, when your turn comes, there's an additional question that's come on Twitter that I'll ask you. as well. But David, if you could respond to these.
Okay, I'll respond to all three, and I'll try to do it very briefly, although I suspect I'd love to have a debate about all of them for several days. But number one, I absolutely agree. You know, Islamic finance would not be here today if we hadn't actually copied conventional banking, because it was just so different that nobody would have accepted it. However, I do believe we're at a point where we have a critical mass and where we have to change things. I think Tom's given some examples of where it could go, but we also have to remember that we're operating a financial system within a conventional system. And that conventional system has certain compliance aspects, such as Basel III, such as leverage in terms of monetary policy, and in terms of liquidity management aspects. And I believe that a number of initiatives are now underway through the likes of the International Islamic Liquidity Management Corporation, for example, in looking at Islamic liquidity. In terms of the only Sharia-compliant payment system available internationally within the banks is through Standard Chartered. Nobody else is Sharia-compliant, for example. So I think there's work to be done, but we've now got critical mass and be tackling it. We should certainly be looking at enhancing and leveraging and mobilizing zakat funds and waqf funds. I think there's a separate discussion on that. But actually earmarking some of the zakat funds and accountability from a transparency and processing standpoint, a percentage of zakat funds could be drawn into or placed in an entrepreneurial funding account. But you'd need some transparency as to how that was accounted for and the performance. The second question on the role of government and banks and so on, simple answer is yes, I agree with you. There's too much red tape and bureaucracy. I was at a breakfast session yesterday with one of the sovereign wealth funds, and a very wealthy Middle Eastern entrepreneur stood up and said, I want to give this money, I want to run businesses, I'm not giving the money, but I want to see successful businesses, and reeled off 27 countries, not just in this region, but in Asia and in Europe, where he tried to set up businesses, and he was basically stonewalled everywhere because there were, in addition to the 27 countries, about 30 rules and regulations that he had to jump over, and he just said, I give up. All I want to do is help create employment, create this, that, and the other, and you're just stonewalling. So the ease of doing business is a very important aspect, and we've got to work at it. The regulatory environment, bureaucracy and red tape, even though they say our country is better for doing business than everybody else, that's just the pretty thing on the advertising. The reality is, how quickly can you get it done? Can you get it done thoroughly? And there are all these excuses about anti-money laundering, blah, 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 blah. Yes, they're there, but there are better ways of doing it than that. The third question on why not launch an initiative to support young entrepreneurship, absolutely. I think the WIEF has done that. They have their youth scheme, and they also have their women's initiative as well. But clearly more needs to be done. I will personally take this up at the town hall meeting with the leadership yesterday and say, let's have some action.
Thank you so much, David. Now, so of course the same three questions for you, Philip, but also, is Dana Horska here? Yeah, do you want me to read your question? Okay. All right, so Dana asked a number of questions. One of them is, can Dubai be capital for Islamic entrepreneurship and create a Silicon Valley model? What will be the challenge? So the other three questions, of course, are also, you're welcome to respond to, but also Dana's question, if you may.
Okay. I think we talked about the Islamic banking, traditional banking. Copying is actually the start of innovation. So once we started copying traditional banking with Islamic, flavors, we started innovating, and I'm very confident that the model goes more into the direction of genuine Islamic banking. Maybe I'll spend a little more time on the role of government on banks, on the regulatory obstacles. These are very different between the different countries. So.
There's one big country in the Middle East which is famous for obstacles, and that it takes up to a year or 2 years of setting up a business, and you probably know more about that than I do. And some of them are easier, some of them are less easy
To set up. It's just bureaucracy, because most of these countries' bureaucracy has been created inside of big corporates, and now lately, these bureaucratic systems are realizing that it can be more efficient, etc. What I know for Dubai Silicon Oasis in Dubai, we've listened to these complaints, that most of them came from entrepreneurs saying, It takes so much time, it takes so much money, I don't know what to do here and there. And we've started to streamline. So we have a Dubai Technology Entrepreneurship Center, and you can set up there, you can go online, fill out your applications, attach your passport copy, send, and then it goes into a system, and 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks later, you have a trade license. We don't have tax. You can open a bank account a couple of days after you receive your trade license. There's, employee incentive schemes can be done within a free zone. Most of the companies we set up are offshore anyway. But that's for different data discussion. Employee restrictions are, not that present in the UAE. As you can see, there's a lot of expats here. Many of them are residents, so it's easy to identify an entrepreneur and a developer, engineer, a CFO who comes from a different country, different nationality, and bring them in. So I think in Dubai, we're leading the way with making it very easy to set up and very easy to operate, as well as very moderately priced. So I know for our entrepreneurship center, for $3,000 a year, you can start operating and running and try it out. So I think there is definitely way to...
The 3,000 is does that include the visa or no?
The visa cost is extra. That's probably 4,000 dirham.
Okay, so
because the visa cost depends on what country you come from. Are you in the UAE, etc.
Fair enough.
But you get a trade license, you get a whole setup, you get a flexi desk, you get free Wi-Fi, you get an office, you get printer access, the whole shebang. And I also know that in countries like Jordan, it's relatively easy to set up, and there's institutions who actually help you. It's a valid comment, and we've been working on it, and I think in the last 1 or 2 years we've strongly improved on it, and as we go forward, we'll go even beyond that and can make it make an easy setup. Within 2 weeks you can have your company, you can have your office, you can have your bank account, etc. Agree on the initiative that we should support entrepreneurs, and I leave it to David to push that. Can Dubai be the regional and global center of entrepreneurship? I believe so, yes, definitely. We've seen 2 days ago the announcement from Sheikh Mohammed that Dubai Internet City will put 4.5 billion dirhams behind this initiative. Our initiative has announced a 1.1 billion dirham development for entrepreneurship and smart city. It is the place where entrepreneurs want to be. We're talking to a lot of entrepreneurs who are in the region, and they say, I start in my country, but the second one is UAE. You have to come to Dubai. If I make it in Dubai, I'll make it bigger. We have a very liberal immigration law. We have very smart people here. It's an affluent population. It's a huge market, very tax-heavy people. Definitely, I believe that Dubai can be the entrepreneurship center in the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia, and one of the global entrepreneurship centers in the world, alongside London, Santiago, Silicon Valley, Kuala Lumpur, and the others.
Thank you so much. So, according to my watch, we have 4 minutes left. I had promised each panelist 1 minute for closing thoughts. So that gives us a minute if anyone has a comment or that they want to make, but I'll stop you after 1 minute. That's the rule.
I have a comment, yeah.
We have, there's one here, and there's one there, and there's Richard in the back. So, and sorry, I won't be able to recognize you, but let's go here. Let's go here in the front table. And apologies to the other 2 gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Anyway, thank you very much for this discussion, which has been very informative. I would like to say that, I guess, replying to one of the panels, that Dubai can be the center of the entrepreneurship in those areas. I think I find it very difficult to be an entrepreneur in Dubai other than the free zones. Now, I started in the US businesses from my apartment and went up to $1.7 million a year sales, and I made some money out of it. And I came here and I lost some money, and it's been very difficult. I opened a business, I closed it. Why? Being the gentleman at the end here, he's saying you have to look at the negative side, of course, so you can be involved. The reason is that in the US, for example, where I spent some time there, For $15, you can go and register and start your own business.
Right.
You have tax incentives, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, you have, and then after that you can file that you made or you did not make taxes. Here, before you start, you need at least 200,000 dirhams, about $50,000 to start. Why? First of all, you cannot start on your own.
Sure.
Maybe you are an entrepreneur, you need some team.
Right.
In order for you to employ those people from Dubai or from outside Dubai, you need visas.
Right.
Each person about 15,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm saying that the center of entrepreneurship cannot work this way. In the free zone, okay, I'm very honest about it. I spent 14 years here.
Right.
I love being here. I work for a company now instead of having my own, but I run it as an entrepreneurship for the owners, meaning that I act as an entrepreneur, but it's for them, it's not for me.
Very important.
I am the marketing manager, it's true, but I'm saying there's a lot of difficulties. It's not as easy as what everybody says.
Sure. No, thank you for sort of highlighting that. I would love to hear more, but I need to give them their time.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Let's start again, Tom, with you and work our way backwards, and then we wrap.
I think just to answer your main point, that entrepreneurism isn't what your title is or what you are, it's the way you think and the way you do. So it doesn't matter if you're an employee or you've set your own thing up, whether you've got a market stall or you have a NASDAQ listed business that you've started, or you're Fadi Gandour, who we all look up to as an amazing entrepreneur. I think it's about mindset.
Excuse me, just one comment. Fadi Gandour and the examples of the other gentlemen, I used to know Fadi Gandour in the US. He started in the US, and that's how he made it. Jordan is a good market for entrepreneurship, but you have to start outside.
And then bring it to Jordan.
And then bring it. And most of the entrepreneurship, let's say, it's a copy, paste.
I think you make a very good point. We discussed this as a panel, actually, that we've almost become, over the last 10 years, there's a generation of either a franchise-led business or just a copy and paste. And what I would say is it's about a mindset. Do you get up every morning, and what do you think about in the shower? What really gets you fired up? And I think that's the difference. If you want to create something, then you're an entrepreneur, whether you work for a business or you work for yourself. And I think that's the overriding thing. It's a mindset, and we want to try and foster that mindset. Where that goes, whether you end up working in the public sector or you end up doing your own thing. If you can develop a mindset which makes you get up every morning and you live and die by your own sword and you create your own legacy and you really drive your destiny, then I think that's, if there's one takeaway from this, I would say it's an entrepreneurial mindset regardless of your sector or your employment status.
Okay, David?
I would endorse that. I put it in my own phraseology. It is about developing collaboration, sharing, it's building on a passion and being passionate about it, it's building your own self-made motivation and building a support network that helps you with that motivation. And I always like to close with the following statement. Those who know me know what it is. There is much to do and not a moment to lose.
Okay, thank you so much. And Philip?
Well, there's not much I can add to that. Just address your comment. I consider the free zones as part of being Dubai. It's an integral part of economic development within the free zones. I think one reason they're created is to make it easier and cheaper for some to start up. And the other one is we're not there yet, so there's lots of stuff to do. And one of the steps to become a real powerhouse in entrepreneurship is to address the issues you've mentioned. And that's something that central government is looking at, I'm sure of that. Leaving it with that, I'm excited about it. I love supporting entrepreneurs. I believe that Dubai can become, and it already is, a powerhouse in entrepreneurship. Otherwise, I wouldn't be good in my job.
Okay, well, thank you. Please join me in thanking the panelists.
And our moderator.